Today we are going to go over Unit 3, Lesson 3, Mr. Bowlby's 5th grade English class. Good day to you, students. What we are going to do today is we are going to learn more about poetry. Yay! We're going to teach you how to quote accurately from a poem when explaining the poem explicitly, what it says, determining the poem's meaning by making inferences from context clues, and identify anaphora, and reflect on how its appearance affects the poem's meaning. We'll discuss this word again in a moment. Now, and you will also write a poem based on the knowledge of anaphora and construct poetry based on personal experiences. So, a couple of key words to remember in vocabulary as they are in your book. The word astronomer, which is a scientist who studies outer space and its bodies, planets, stars, moon. The word figures, which is numbers or diagrams, so you learn that. Figures is a math term for you. Learned, which is an adjective, a shortened version of the word learned. This learned has an apostrophe, so it's L-E-A-R-N apostrophe D without the E in the middle. The apostrophe stands in for missing letters used to describe people, especially those who have spent many years studying one subject. So in essence, if you're learned on a subject, it means you've been studying the subject. So that's how it's used. The word lecture is a talk, usually given by a teacher or another expert. And I count it says a teacher or other expert, implying the teacher's an expert too, because he is, or she, on a single topic. Lectures typically are referring to professors in college and such, but anyone who gets up and basically can lecture. The word mystical, which means not of this world. The word proofs, which is in math, arguments that show an idea or rule arguments that show an idea or rule is correct, must be correct because it proofs. There are proofs, so that's another math term. You'll see a lot of math terms. Unaccountable, that is that something cannot be explained, a person who does not take responsibility. So there's two different definitions for unaccountable. Either the unexplained or not taking responsibility, unaccountable. The literary vocabulary, anaphora, which I may not be pronouncing correctly, is the repetition of words that start a series of lines in a poem. Okay, let me get my projection. Now, before we read the poem, we're going to think about different ways to describe something. Look at this picture. It's a chemical compound. I'm not going to tell you a chemical compound of what just yet. Would you put whatever this chemical compound is in your body? What if I described it a little bit more? What if I said it is food, that it is delicious to some, not everyone. Had one friend in college that did not like chocolate, and that was perfectly fine. I ate it all for her. And I just told you what it was. Chocolate! That chemical compound is chocolate! Now, I could sit here and I could tell you how yummy chocolate is, how much I enjoy eating chocolate. Or I could get a Hershey Kiss that I found stuffed in the back of one of the mailboxes in the office. Thank you to the teacher who let me have it. I could show you a piece of chocolate. Or I could give you a piece of chocolate and let you try it. What would you rather do? Would you rather look at a diagram? Would you rather look at the chocolate bar itself? Or the Hershey Kiss? Or would you rather get to eat it yourself? That is what we're talking about with experience. Learning the difference between experiencing it through books and the classroom setting versus actually being there, actually being able to enjoy it. So you get that? So we're talking about the poem by Walt Whitman, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. See, there's that word. When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. You're going to open up your lovely poetry journal. I'll remind you that you have area in the very, very back for creative note-taking while you're thinking and brainstorming. Walt Whitman is one of my personal favorite poets ever. He's an amazing poet. There are so many that I like. He is actually, he was born in 1819, which is way back during like the Civil War era, Abraham Lincoln era. Abraham Lincoln actually liked Walt Whitman's poems. There's all that stuff going on in the world, and he talked about everyday life in his poems. So let's go ahead and look. You can just look at the lines of the poem. When you see the poem on page 27, we're going to talk about these lines together. Now, the apostrophe, remember that means there's letters missing because obviously the word learned should have an E in it. You may infer from your knowledge of the word learned, or from the fact that ed is a common ending for words, that the word learned can be a verb, as in, today I learned things at school, which is what I would like you to do at the end of every school day, by the way. Or an adjective. She was a learned woman. So when you hear it like that, she was a learned woman. In this poem, it's an adjective because it's describing the astronomer. When I heard the learned astronomer, which right away you have to ask yourself, okay, so this poem is probably about Walt Whitman's writing about a experience of hearing a astronomer. Because it's when I heard the learned astronomer, and you wonder, well, what's the rest of it? So what's taking place? The astronomer is speaking in a lecture room. Let's go ahead and read this poem through. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were arranged in columns before me, when I was shown charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer before he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became, tired and sick, till rising and gliding out I wandered off by myself in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. It's 8 lines, 1 smooth stanza. So what's taking place between the speaker and the astronomer? The astronomer is speaking in a lecture hall. I need to move this Hershey Kiss because it looks way too tempting and I can't chew and talk at the same time. So we're just put it there. Not good enough. When I learned. Okay, so the astronomer speaking in a lecture room. The speaker of the poem hears the astronomer as is stated in the title. The following line describes the scene a little bit more completely. It says, when I'm sitting, heard the astronomer, where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room. What does that imply? That, they were applauding, so he was probably pretty good, right? So what words appear in this line that do not appear in the poem's first line? Basically, the one that says, when I heard the learned astronomer, continues on telling us what he's learning about. Those are the things that he's learning about. So, The new words are sitting, where he lectured with such much applause in the room. So when I heard the learned astronomer, let me read it through one more time here. When I heard the learned astronomer, or you could say when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured. Think about why the speaker leaves the word learned out. When I, sitting, heard the astronomer. See, we can infer, again, the applause from the lecture. And he was probably pretty good. Looking back at the poem again, the speaker hears the astronomer, but he sees many things. So there's the difference between what he's hearing and what he's seeing, visually and auditorily. He sees proofs, figures, charts, columns, diagrams, probably some kind of he's an astronomer, so he's teaching them about the sky, teaching them about space, probably something pretty fascinating to get that kind of an applause. Whitman repeats the word when a good deal. You got 4 times right there. When I heard, when the proofs, when I was shown, when I, sitting, heard. Okay. That's the anaphora, repeating words. Poems also often use anaphora when adding emphasis to a thought or idea or emotion. Now, there is purpose in using anaphora. When the speaker here seemed to be stressing by repeating the word when. Based on the poem, you can kind of think about what your answer might be there. Why is he using the word when? The idea the students are thinking the poem's content and form, using material from the poem there to think about your answer. He's stressing what he heard. He saw a lot of different things, and he's stressing the timing. He's stressing that it's important that this is happening. This happened when, the specifics to that. The speaker is remembering when he attended an astronomy lecture and was bombarded with a lot of information, repeating certain words. It's important to note that this is what the speaker tells us about his experience. Even though the speaker does not exactly say what he felt, we can use the poem's clues to consider how the speaker might have felt in the situation. One thing that's important, students, is that context is always king. Context rules over all things. You can't pull something out without looking at its context, its overall picture. That's why it's always good to have as many perspectives as you can, as many people telling something about one story as possible. The more information you can get, the more close you can get to the truth and to what actually happens or what's really being said. That's why context is so important when you're reading and you're pulling lines out, is understanding what's happening. So we can see from the poem's clues. Okay. All right, so we'll talk about our writing now. In this activity, you will write a poem in the form that Whitman used, the same form employing the anaphora. For the first 4 lines, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, writing without anaphora in the final 4 lines. And then you'll offer a brief explanation as to the effect of the anaphora and lack thereof, reinforcing the poem's form and content. You might want to use props, maybe sweater, globe, book, shells, something to inspire your poem, your idea. Pick a time in the past when something made you feel bored. It cannot be one of my classes. Then a change happened and made it more interesting. That might have happened. Sometimes in my class, maybe waiting in the doctor's office until you could get the ice cream your parents promised you afterward, or maybe when you had to clean your room before you go play with your friends. Happens a lot in our house. Make sure the time you think of when you remember feeling bored or when you stop feeling bored is something that you liked happened. Describe the place and situation by answering the questions in the book. Right? Well, yeah, that's 3.2. So we skipped 3.1. Let's go back to 3.1. We'll come back to 3.2 real quick. 3.1 on page 28 says, answer the following questions about Walt Whitman's poems. You may consult the poem and glossary in your journal. There's always a glossary in here with the words, so if you have trouble with one of the words, you can go look in the glossary. Dictionaries are also available. It says to write down the first words of lines 5 through 8. So that would be the what word? When. How does the opening word differ from the opening words of line 1 through 4? Because the first word of lines 5 through 8 is not when. So what you're doing is backtracking. You're looking at the first, write down the first word of lines 5 through 8 on question number 1. Then you're writing the opening words and you're putting how they differ. Because he does not use the word when in the latter half of his poem, but the first one does. That's what question 2 is saying. What's the difference between the two? Question 1 is saying write down the first word so that you see the difference. Number 3, in line 5, the speaker describes his feelings of the lecture. What words show how he describes how he felt? Go over what we just talked about. You can say how he felt by looking there and saying how unaccountable I became, tired and sick. I guess it just wasn't there for him right there. Earlier in this discussion, we predicted how the speaker might feel at the lecture. What clues to use from the poem that helped you make a prediction? According to line 6, what did the speaker do as a result of these feelings? So use the words from your poem to answer that, as well as 6 and 7. Paraphrase your answer in questions 5 by putting the poem's words in your own word. Number 6, page 29. Paraphrase. We've talked about paraphrasing. So to remind you what paraphrasing is, students, is taking information and wording it in your own words. The important points of something in your own words, paraphrasing it, rewording it so that you can help remember what it says, also so that you can work on comprehending and understanding what it's saying. And then what does the speaker do in lines 7 to 8? Starting in page 30, starting with line 5, the poem no longer uses the anaphora, instead begins with a different word. We know that lines 1 through 4, the speaker is starting to feel tired and sick. Why might someone who feels sick and tired use the same words over and over again? I want you to answer these questions. Answer 9, based on the variety of words used. At the start of 5 to 8, how do you think the speaker might feel at the end of the poem? Number 10, based on the poem, do you think the speaker would rather hear someone describe his favorite food or eat his favorite food? I would rather eat my favorite food than hear a description. Ice cream, any day. Brahms. Bring on Brahms. Bring on the ice cream. Okay, so now we're circling back to 3.2, which I kind of already hit a little bit on. We're going to work on writing our own poem. So, like I said, pick a time and a place when you felt bored or so. Then answer the 4 questions on page 31. Where were you? What were people doing around you? What did you hear? What did you see? What did you taste? What did you touch? And what did you smell? Hear, see, taste, touch, smell. How long did it feel like you were there? Sometimes when I'm waiting in a doctor's office, it can feel like ages. Or in line for Space Mountain at Disneyland or something like that. Any of those amusement parks or Silver City or what have you. All right, so 3.2, page 32. Now that you've thought about the situation and remembered, use your answer to the questions on the previous page to write a poem like Whitman's. On each line that starts with when, write a description of the scene connected to each of your answers above. So you're using the word when, okay? For the first 4 lines, you're using the word when. You might need to rearrange some words from your answers to ensure the lines make sense. We call that revision when you change your writing. Writers are always revising their work. That's perfectly fine. It's normal. Most novels have at least several 100,000 words that the author never uses because he has to revise constantly. It's constantly revising. Writing is rewriting. Writing is rewriting. Revision is a great technique that can help you make your work better. After you write the 4 when lines to describe the situation you're in, compose 4 more lines. Describe how your situation changed or what helped end your boredom. You may start those lines with any word you like as long as you do not use the word when. Only the first 4 lines can have the word when. The second 4, no. There's the vocabulary on the back and more vocabulary. So if you need to remind yourself what those words mean. And then there's Walt Whitman. Born on May 3rd, 1819 in Long Island, New York, Walt Whitman worked as a teacher and a journalist before becoming a poet. His poetry, related to the people of all backgrounds, made him one of America's most well-known and beloved writers. During Whitman's time, the United States of America was divided by slavery, threatening to split the country in 2. The Civil War inspired him to write Drum Taps, poetry about the war and his experience as a battlefield nurse. His writing was powerful. Even Abraham Lincoln, President Abraham Lincoln, admired him. In fact, several of his poems are tributes to Lincoln. Whitman also wrote poems about nature. Whitman died in 1892, however. His poetry and free verse style, along with his conversational tone, remain appreciated and admired. So, what we learned about today, dear students, is, again, visualizing detail, writing anaphora poems, and learning more about Walt Whitman. Have a good day. See you in the next lesson.